Hello listeners and welcome to the NKNews Podcast recorded in Seoul on Monday, February 11th, 2019. Today I am joined by Dr. Jae Song of the University of Melbourne to talk about her first book, Human Rights versus Peace Activism, Inter-Korean Relations and specifically the role of women in them, and North Korean celebrity defectors, if we get time. But before that, an announcement. Once again, NK News is offering a free year's subscription to one reviewer who reviews our podcast, not only at iTunes but also at other platforms. And you can save $50 off your subscription by using the code PODCAST at the NK News checkout. Don't forget, if you enjoy the podcast, please share it with others so that our listenership will continue to grow. Okay, so my next guest, Dr. Jae Song, is a Korea Foundation Senior Lecturer in Korean Studies and Coordinator of Migration Cluster at the Asia Institute of the University of Melbourne, which of course listeners will know is my alma mater. Dr. Song completed her PhD in Politics and International Studies at Cambridge, a Master's in Law specializing in Human Rights in Hong Kong, and a BS in Mathematics in Seoul, so she is quite the polymath. She is the author of Human Rights Discourse in North Korea, Post-Colonial Marxist and Confucian Perspectives, published in 2010, co-author of Irregular Migration and Human Security in East Asia, published in 2014, as well as the author of a number of peer-reviewed academic articles, some of which you can find on her website. Just Google Dr. Jae Song, University of Melbourne. Her current research focuses on irregular migration and human security in Asia-Pacific using complexity theory. Welcome, Dr. Song, and thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
When I invited you on and asked you what you'd like to talk about, you gave me a list of great topics.
I did.
Ideally, I'd love to talk about all of them, but I decided to focus just on a few of them and ask you to come back on the show again in the near future to cover the rest.
Oh, that would be great.
Excellent. All right, so first off, I thought we could start by talking about your book, which came out in 2010. I know that we are probably 9 years on from when you sent the completed manuscript to your publisher, but it's such a fascinating title and, of course, still a relevant topic. I mean, last week was the 5th anniversary of the release of the report of the UN Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in North Korea, and recently I had Ms. Teodora Gyupchanova from NKDB on the podcast, and we talked about North Korean women's menstrual health. And then a week or two ago, I interviewed Ms. Sina Paulson of the UN's Office of the High Commission for Refugees, also talking about North Korean human rights. So I know a little bit about human rights discourse on North Korea, but I'm not familiar with specifically post-colonial, Marxist or Confucian perspectives on that topic. So could you give us a nutshell summary of each of those three particular perspectives?
Wow, that's a big question to start with.
Yes.
Well, first of all, that was my PhD thesis that I turned into a book manuscript. And the reason why I did my PhD in the UK was during that time, North Korean material, because basically the source material is works of Kim Jong-il, Kim Yo Jong, and 노동신문, 천리마, 근로자, that sort of periodic magazine published by North Korean government.
And they're hard to access here.
Yeah, well, I would try to do it in Korea, from South Korea, but it was categorized as a harmful material for South Koreans under the national security law, I guess.
Yep.
I was a graduate student and also research assistant for the center, Sejong Institute and also the Institute for Far Eastern Studies.
Yep.
I had a special permission to have access the North Korean material, but because the official, access was blocked, the reason why I went to the UK was to have a free access to those North Korean material.
Yeah, so let me interrupt there for our listeners to give another example of that. In 2013, I went to the Unifications Materials Library at the National Library, and I wanted to get a printout of the names of the North Korean people who were officially at Kim Jong-il's funeral back in late 2011. And the Nordong Shinmun, of course, published a complete list of all the officials in order of importance, more or less, from most important to least important. It's like 300 or so names. And I was able to look at that list of names on the computer. But if I wanted to print that list of names, I had to fill in a form which would be, and that form would be countersigned and stamped with the seal of either the chancellor of a university or a minister or vice minister of the Unification Ministry, just to print it out. It was okay. The lady at the library said it was okay for me to write each name if I wanted to do that by my own hand with pen, but I could not photograph the list on the computer screen because you can't take any photographs. I couldn't print the list, and I couldn't make a photocopy of the original newspaper without having a document signed by either a chancellor or a vice minister of unification. That was 2013.
13.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, when I was doing this research, that was 2000. I mean, I started my research on North Korea in 1999, so it was pretty early on. But then it was okay during the Kim Dae-jung administration. Yes. The categorization as a harmful material for South Korean was during the Hyun era.
Was
strangely, ironically.
That's counterintuitive.
And it was by the police, not by NIS, National Intelligence Service, but it was police defining North Korean material as a harmful material for South Korean citizens. And I was particularly interested in this periodic magazine called 철학 연구, Philosophical Studies, where you can read about North Korean philosophers changing kind of mentality and thinking about how to interpret North Korean, socialism, what they call it, 우리식 사회주의, our style socialism.
What's the name of that journal again? 철학
연구.
연구, okay.
연구, yeah. And that was just extremely complicated to have that access. So that was my PhD. Many people said, there's nothing much to study about North Korean human rights because there is no human rights. But when you look at and read between the lines in North Korean materials, you can see the change of, these different ideologies depending on their interaction with international society. So I identify three particular trends in North Korean discourses on human rights. What people are talking about is human rights in North Korea or human rights discourse on North Korea, but not North Korean discourse, how North Korea understand human rights, which is a pretty, much a Western concept. How we understand is Western, human rights and liberal ideas, how North Korean interpret in their own documents. So the first period was post-colonial. So anything anti-Japanese, anti-Japanese sentiment or anti-Japanese policy is justified as a full protection of human rights. So smashing pro-Japanese collaborator or any Japanese, legacy or influence is justified as, they're the enemies of human rights for protection.
So, for example, confiscation of property of pro-Japanese collaborators, that would be an example of human rights, of fulfilling human rights.
Exactly, during the post-colonial, period. But then they went on to a sort of Marxist-Leninist understanding of human rights, which is focusing on socio-economic rights rather than civil and political rights. So
it's the right to eat, the right to have a roof over your head, the right to have clothes.
Free education, free housing, public healthcare, and dictatorship of the proletariat. They were saying rights are given by benevolent leader, not something that you're born with. And in return, what they're focusing is the duties of citizens.
Right.
So in return, you need to perform your respective duties to be granted, corresponding rights by the leader.
So now here we are in 2019. Has there been a further change, or are we still living in this period of more or less neo-Confucian perspectives on sort of a nationalist Korean-centric perspective on human rights in North Korea?
Well, I can gather that Kim Jong Un wants to be a normal leader, but he can't, get away from that. He had this power inherited from his father and grandfather. So there is that still sort of a Confucian or neo-Confucian, Korean Confucian, influence on that.
And I imagine that even though he can try to evolve things and change things a bit, he can never say dad was wrong, granddad was wrong.
No, he can't.
That legacy is set in stone. It's sort of, a concrete thing.
Yeah.
And so he has to try to make it look like he's keeping them the same while perhaps in reality massaging them a bit into another shape.
That's right. I mean, the New Year's speech where it was taking place, he had sort of his office was almost like an ancestral worshiping place. He had a big picture of Kim Il-sung and, family photo. Although he, got a sort of additional furniture, sort of Western style furniture. Probably that's influenced from his sister, Yo Jong.
Ah, you think she's the chief interior decorator? later.
I think so. I think she's sort of adding that bit of color and the taste, and it's sort of mixture of American and more sort of a European to my eyes.
Okay, well, we're coming back to Kim Yo Jong later on. This leads us organically into the first topic which you suggested, which is human rights versus peace activists. Is that a natural opposition, or is that one that has come about for certain reasons?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a mystery for me for a long time, because I also gathered that sentiment in this recent peace forum I attended in Pyeongchang. Peace activists seem to be avoiding that talking about North Korean human rights issues because that's upsetting them. Peace activists believing talking about human rights in North Korea will be upsetting their North Korean counterparts. And this is a very critical moment, this year, last year, and this year when, inter-Korean relations and the North Korea-US relation is being improved. It's not a time to talk about, their Achilles heels because, we all know that they have one of the worst human rights record in the world. So talking about human rights, it's just like pointing your weakest point or ugly side.
Do these peace activists believe that human rights should ever be raised, or do they kind of postpone it almost indefinitely?
I think they believe there is some sort of a sequence. The peace process should go before, talking about that sort of delicate topics such as human rights. Bringing political prisons, gulag, in the negotiation table is not gonna, have that conversation in a very friendly manner. So let's have the peaceful environment first, then we can request a visit to gulag or any political or labor camps. And based on the trust, they can slowly talk about those more politically sensitive issues.
How specific are they in a timetable about when we should, for example, request a visit to the camps? Like, do they say, after this happens, then we can do that? Or is it kind of a vague, when we have peace, or when a treaty is signed? Even that's pretty specific. What's their sort of their timeline?
Once we build trust.
Okay, that does sound a bit vague.
We have to understand, the activists or the peace activists or democratic activists or past student activists background. They tend to be, sympathizing North Koreans, or they tend to be a leftist, slightist, or progressive. So probably in their minds, they have been imagining North Korea as a communist or socialist country. They also know that was their imagination. They're probably disillusioned by just looking at the inherited power down to son and down to grandson.
Right.
So they know that they want to believe that North Korea is a socialist country, socialist state, because they're sort of leftist Marxist in their sort of political, they share the same political ideals, but they also understand North Korea is not. So on the surface, North Korea looks like a socialist state because all their friends, Russia and China or Vietnam, the former allies, are all socialist country. But these peace activists and democratic activists in the past, they also know that North Korea is not one of those. But from a nationalist perspective, they are the one who you need to, work with or live with in the same Korean peninsula, the same space.
Now, have you ever read the book, I think it came out about 3 years ago, by Kim Yo Jong called Naran Gangchol? I think that's the title. Did you ever read that book?
Yeah, he's one of the student activists who totally changed his political ideas.
Well, I want to present a counterpoint here. Having read his book, I thought it was interesting that he argues that he's actually the only one who hasn't changed. As a left-wing student demonstrator in the 1980s, he said to other Koreans, stop making excuses for the military dictatorship government of South Korea. Stop saying we need to have economic development first and then human rights later on. Let's have human rights now, and then we can talk about these things. And he said, I'm exactly the same with North Korea. Stop making excuses for North Korea political situation. And he said all the former left-wing comrades of his back in the 1980s who said, well, you need to understand North Korea's unique geopolitical situation. We need to have trust building first, or give them recognition from America first, or security guarantees first, and then we can talk about North Korean human rights. He's actually the only one who's been consistent. What do you think of that argument?
That's interesting. You see the persistency, in his argument. But North Korea has changed. I mean, that we also need to realize that this is a different time, different leadership, and what he's trying to say is understandable, but we also need to realize, South Korean politics is going from, far right to far left now. And while North Korea is, going through the inherited power transition in the North.
Are there any people or groups who try to bring both elements together of human rights and peace activism in some kind of balance?
It seems that as an academic, I see both sides. The peace activists, they're very reluctant to bring in the human rights as their main focus. And on the other hand, there is this group, rather, I would say in South Korean politics, rather conservative group, keeps talking about, the group that keep talking about North Korean human rights issues, including the labor rights and gulag and lack of freedom of expression and no religious freedom. And these two groups don't talk to each other. They're a totally different group. The peace activists probably belong to the leftist, more progressive forces. The North Korean human rights, including the defector group, is sort of siding with a conservative or far rights group. But human rights is a very, very broad topic, and these two groups don't talk to each other is an issue for bringing this peace negotiation and inter-Korean dialogue going ahead.
Well, I do find, there is certainly an irony that these same progressive groups who would, for example, criticize, say, the large number of people imprisoned in America, or the same groups that would, that back in 2003 sharply criticized the invasion of Iraq, would remain silent on gulags in North Korea or North Korea building nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles, right? So that there is a lack of consistency in these groups. What I'm really wondering is it so political? Now I'm rambling a little bit, but back in 2004, the now defunct progressive South Korean magazine Mal, they had a whole issue devoted to the issue of the problem of North Korean defectors, North Korean human rights, and why isn't anybody on the left allowed to talk about that in South Korea? That was actually recognized as an issue, as a problem by progressives back in 2004, saying we know that human rights aren't any good in North Korea, but why do we leave it to only the conservative side in South Korean politics to use it as a weapon almost, to attack the North Korean government? Why don't we talk about this as well? And I think here we are 15 years later. We haven't really moved very far from that point.
That's true.
Are there any groups who are not traditionally progressive or traditionally conservative, any groups or any individuals who are trying to bring both of the elements of North Korean human rights and peace activism together?
Yeah, I think I was the one who's tried to bring this both side of the argument together, but I haven't come across any activists try to build a bridge between these two groups. Thanks for helping me. I think leftists. What I wanted to say is that it's the conservative group is targeting the leftist group, that they are not interested in North Korean human rights. And what I'm saying is that it's not the case. They have been thinking very, very carefully and seriously how to approach this issue. When the two Koreas are divided, when South Korea has no access to North Korea, what's the point of talking about the human rights violation in political prison where we have no access to? And who do we get the information from? These are probably defectors or a very small portion of defectors who have experience in the prison, who have stayed or have a prison experience back in North Korea. Can we trust them? Can we really rely on those information? is it really not politicized for political purpose? The human rights is not really genuine. Human rights are almost like a hijack by this conservative group. So these two groups are not talking to each other, and maybe the progressive and left is not talking about North Korean human rights is because this agenda was totally hijacked by the conservative, and it's probably not a good idea to join this force to jump on this very sensitive topic, especially during this critical moment of inter-Korean relation being improved.
Then how do the peace activists respond to, for example, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry report on human rights in North Korea, which is not something that was managed by or controlled by the South Korean conservatives, and that tried to present a whole picture based on hundreds of testimonies rather than just looking at one or two North Korean defectors?
I think they have a kind of a moral obligation to respond to North Korean human rights issues now, because they have been silent. It's true that they have been very silent on this issue. What they're trying to reformulate or reconceptualize North Korean human rights issues now is, the most serious human rights violation in North Korea is not those civil and political rights, but right to information, right to access to information, freedom of information, right to family reunion. And that's also in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So framing what Moon Jae-in or a previous Roh Moo-hyun government have been doing, having more inter-Korean dialogue, cooperation, and family reunion, packaging them that's also to protect human rights for both North and South Koreans. So not just having this binary concept of civil and political rights is more important than socio-economic rights. So leftists will concern more about the right to food, right to housing, and the conservative or the more the right-wing group will talk about freedom of information, religious freedom, not just this binary concept and confrontational framework. But peace activists or the progressives also framing what's happening now, InterKorean Cooperation, as protection of human rights.
But since it's the same government of North Korea that impinges upon its citizens' civil and political rights as well as social and economic rights, doesn't it come down to the point that, as you mentioned at the beginning of this section, that peace activists don't really like to criticize the North Korean government because it makes North Korean government upset?
Those social economic rights and right to peace, that's a new sort of discourse they're coming up with. The peace activist is creating this new discourse, which exists also internationally. Right to peace is a what we call a third generation human rights. It's more sort of solidarity based. It's a group rights. So right to peace, peace for all living in the Korean Peninsula, for example. And these kind of concepts, socio-economic rights and the third generation group rights, are more receptive to North Koreans. So human rights was traditionally considered as freedom. It's a liberty-based right. That's the first generation of human rights, which was pretty much the overarching or the dominant discourse in North Korean human rights agenda. But now this more sort of a progressive leftist or peace activists is bringing in this new, more receptive human rights idea in the peace process.
Okay, well, that's certainly one a discourse to watch in the future. It's a hard one for me to understand, but I'm learning as I go, I suppose. So let's talk about the Pyeongchang Olympics, 1 year on, and InterKorean Cooperation. You were in Pyeongchang recently for the 1 year anniversary of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. Tell us what was that all about?
Yeah, I just drove back from Pyeongchang, and it was interesting experience. I didn't expect the peace conference to be that sort of extravagant as an opening ceremony.
Now, when did this peace summit or forum begin? What was the day? With the opening day.
Opening ceremony was on Saturday evening, and there were some dancing ladies and very loud music. I said in my Twitter, I don't know, maybe I left Korea too long ago. I don't know how the major conferences are run in Korea these days. at some point, I guess there's a new trend that is very sort of audio visual, event focus. These conferences, was led by a professional MC, sort of creating creating an environment before the second U.S.-North Korea summit. Sort of presenting an image that, the whole world want the peace on the Korean Peninsula. So it was sort of creating, kind of environment before the second summit.
Were there any people there from the national government?
Yeah, there are some people, a special advisor for unification minister, and some people from local government, Kangwon, who's been doing the InterKorean Cooperation on economy and social culture exchanges. So I got some good insight, knowledge, how North Korean behavior actually have changed since August last year.
Really?
Yeah, they say before August last year, the North Korean counterpart that the Gangwon province, some of the officials and also the civil society representative has been, communicating with North Korean counterpart on forest and also, some ecosystem, some ecological projects. Before August last year, they were all saying that, why can't you just make your own decision? Why do you always have to consult with the US? Are you sort of presenting a sort of image of South Korean as a US puppets? So you're not independent. So they're sort of almost, their attitude is preaching. Can't you do just something alone or independently from the US? But now they change their attitude. Sort of, they understand there is international sanction by the UN, the international community, also US alone sanction. So we understand you can't really do. We, North and South Korean, can't really do, these things among ourselves. We have to understand there's international sanction that we need to overcome. So they became more realistic understanding of the international politics. They're restrained, South Korean being restrained by this international pressure, especially the US. So they're more understanding, more respectful than before.
Now, looking back at the Olympics 1 year on, what's your assessment of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics? What did they mean for the movement towards peace and reconciliation between North and South Korea? What was achieved?
Pyeongchang Olympic was very special. I think that was really the moment that the whole atmosphere has changed, not just between North and South Korea, but that was the beginning of the dialogue between North Korea and the US, and South Korea roles, South Korean president, especially Moon Jae-in's role, being the messenger between the two countries. Between the two Koreas, there have been 36 meetings, the ministerial level or also a practical level, and they're doing the road and railway constructions together. So there has been great improvement in inter-Korean relation. And also, U.S.-North Korea relation is going at although it's slow compared to the speed of inter-Korean relation improvement.
Now, at the opening ceremony of the Olympics, of course, famously, Kim Jong Un's sister Kim Yo Jong and Kimyongnam, one of the regime's oldest and at least ostensibly high-ranking officials, both sat in the stadium during the opening ceremony, very close to President Moon and First Lady Kim, and Vice President Pence of the United States was just behind them with Otto Warmby's father. It sometimes looked awkward, but Kim Yo Jong at all times seemed like she was comfortable, confident, in control, and very satisfied with what was happening around her. Looking back, how do you read those images? She's
playing an absolutely critical role in bringing Kim Jong Un out of his own den and bringing into international arena, making him more comfortable in front of the TV and in front of South Koreans who are watching him, doing speeches and sort of representing Kim Jong Un with a female face, and Kimyongnam, and he's not threatening at all, and he was there. And at one point, he had some tears in his eyes, watching all this. But Yo Jong's playing. She's in charge of the propaganda division, so creating all this extra audiovisual effects when it's giving speeches and orchestrating all the movements and the sequence and who's presenting flowers. She's always there, sort of around. And she's famous being in the background in an important scenes, in not just in North Korean propaganda, but in international media. And also North Korean media, she's always, somewhere there, controlling the public image of the North Korean regime. Kim Jong Un alone would not make it, that friendly or charismatic.
Now, the question I ask a lot of my guests is this: why did Kim Jong Un choose at the beginning of 2018 to stop rejecting President Moon's calls for talks and calming down the heated atmosphere, and to actually start talking and participating? Was it because he felt that he had finished completed his project to achieve nuclear power and ICBM possession? Or was it because Donald Trump threatened him with kinetic action? What do you think it was?
We're not sure whether we can trust him. The official discourse says he finished the completion of nuclear, weapons, and that's according to North Korean strategy. That's the way to get U.S. involved in solving their problems. So what they say is 2017 was the year to finish their nuclearization, and 2018 and onward, they're focusing on economy. But can we really trust them? Is it just a tactic to bring in U.S. on the table and, have less, economic sanction, international sanction to survive? And survival for whom? Is it survival for the regime or survival for the country? So I personally don't trust this switch of the policy.
But now, North and South Korean InterKorean Cooperation, it seems to have hit a bit of a wall in the last couple of months, that some of the initial energy seems to have faded. We haven't seen much progress in, for example, the railroad project in the last month or so, or the roads or other things. So realistically, how much further can InterKorean cooperation go as long as the current sanctions regimes last?
That was the interesting sort of insight I gather from the government officials. I think both Koreas understand, they're stuck in this international pressure, international sanction, and setting aside the relation between North Korea and the U.S. and what they can do between the two Koreas is to focus on this inter-Korean, economic cooperation and other, exchanges in socio-cultural affairs. So it's been very fast. I mean, it's incredibly fast, how they, communicate with each other and having this railway project. Whether this can go ahead, I think we still have to see the impact of the extent of the international sanction, how much they can do. Another, interesting insight I gather was that South Korean, the government official doesn't really understand what's going on between North Korea and the US. They only guess what's actually being discussed between the two countries. The South Korean, the government is stuck in between. The general sentiment is that there's nothing they can do. It's between basically the two countries, North Korea and the US, and it depends, whether they want to tell us what was going on. So Biegun recently visited South Korea, and he went to the Foreign Affairs first to see the Minister Kang Kyung-hwa.
Right.
But then it was not a substantive talk, but he went straight to the Blue House and had a 50-minute talk with National Security Advisor Jong Un. So it seems that it's not, State Department, informing its ally, South Korean Foreign Affairs Ministry, that this has been discussed. And then as an ally, we have a right to know, what's been discussed between North Korea and the US. But that doesn't seem to be happening. I didn't, get an impression that South Korea was fully informed of what the U.S. intention for this second summit and what the North Korea is intending to achieve out of this second summit.
Okay, now let's move from talking about inter-Korean relations in general to the role of women in inter-Korean relations. We have a number of high-ranking and prominent women in both Koreas, although North Korea at the moment seems to have more. First of all, what do you think about South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa? Is she doing a good job?
I wish she does appear in the public arena more actively and being part of this peace process or the dialogue. She's been a great communicator. She's a very excellent communicator and very competent. She has many years of UN experience, got an international sense. But her role seemed to be limited in this dialogue between North Korea and the U.S., being a sort of a messenger between the two countries, like National Security Advisor did in 2018, for example. So her role is limited compared to, other people in the Blue House. It seems that the core messages, the instructions, or the strategic thinking is coming from the Blue House, and the Foreign Affairs role is sort of limited and more sort of a technical side.
Now, I heard a contact of mine within the Foreign Ministry said that mid-level officials like her and respect her, but that high-level officials look down on her as not being a career diplomat. She's not someone who rose through the ranks properly, like other foreign ministers do, and that she's someone who really just started out as a translator for Kim Dae-jung, that there's a bit of a kind of a looking down on her for that reason. And I wonder whether perhaps that might be a reason why she might be sidelined.
That's part of the big problem and long-term problem in Korean society, patriarchy. She's a highly, highly talented woman and person. Whether she started her career as an interpreter, well, that doesn't really matter. Foreign affairs obviously need a language talent, but she rose in her sort of career ladder very quickly because she was picked up by some important people above, male, senior. So I also hear a lot from the people who passed the national examination, the 외무고시, who joined the foreign ministry, that she's not real, the government official. She just was picked up by some people, and she rose to top because she had a special connection with this powerful man. But that's very demeaning. That's very disrespectful way to describe someone's talent. She also has this vast experience in international organization. I think that's a bit unfair.
Now, what about South Korean First Lady Kim Jong Suk? She has the same name as Kim Jong Un's grandmother.
That's true.
Right, I looked, at least according to Korean Wikipedia, the Hanja of the Jong Suks are exactly the same. So not only does it sound alike, but actually the meanings of the names are the same, which is interesting. She was at the InterKorean Summit in April last year, and she spoke with Kim Jong Un's wife, Ri Sol-ju, and they seemed to get quite friendly. What was your observations of First Lady Kim Jong Suk?
So the optics are telling me that Kim Jong Un and Ri Sol-ju were sort of missing the parental care. When Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong Suk were there, I think the name is just a coincidence, but
oh, sure.
Moon Jae-in, Kim Jong Suk there is sort of looking after this young leader. And Moon Jae-in did say that, this young leader is going through a very difficult time. He wants to, improve the country's economic situation out of isolation for a long time. So I sort of sense this parental kind of care from the South Korean president, to North Korean young leader and young leaders couple. And the women's role, especially there, from Kim Jong Suk to Ri Sol-ju, sort of, patting and having this small conversation, lady conversations, or more of care, loving and caring sort of manner.
Now, what about Ri Sol-ju herself? Didn't she say, I can't remember if it was the April summit or another meeting, but she said something in a public forum about, my husband should smoke less. And some North Koreans there were like, she made an implied criticism of our leader. How could she do that? But, she apparently got away with that. Yeah,
and she's setting a new kind of role model for North Korean elite women. I mean, she's wearing, very Western clothes. Where some news report, I'm not sure, I actually haven't seen, she's wearing Chanel bags and some Western, luxury brands. But she's also revolutionary in a sense that she's holding arms, with Kim Jong Un, and which is quite rare. They're sort of
not walking behind him.
Walking behind. Sometimes she does that. Sort of, she presented both a traditional North Korean women's image, but also a sort of more young or youngish, or more Western style, casual, sort of more egalitarian husband and wife relation. In a public forum.
Do we imagine that she gets on well with Kim Yo Jong?
It seems that they're getting along, but I mean, there's always the in-law, conflict in any Korean families.
I can't remember. Have we ever seen them, the two women together in the same, in the same photograph or the same piece of film footage?
Yo Jong seems to be in the background. She's enjoying that sort of very mysterious sort of...
hiding behind a column or a chair or something.
Spiritual, yes. But, highly controlling in the background. So probably Yo Jong is putting, Lee Seol-ju on the forefront, creating an image of a perfect wife, perfect woman, perfect first lady image for the regime.
So Yo Jong as the sort of puppet master and Seol-ju as the trophy wife.
It sounds like that.
Now, of course, Kim Jong-il, he had throughout his life several women, but never really had he never was seen with an official wife. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Kim Il Sung, he had Kim Jong Suk as the official wife. In some of those, partisan paintings, we saw Kim Jong Suk using her body to shield Kim Il Sung from the Japanese enemy bullets and, shooting her revolver to kill the Japanese. But did she ever actually appear in public?
I don't think so. Not in public. Back in those days, there was no TV and there was no social media or anything. But she appears in a propaganda poster, idealized North Korean women who are, both caring but also strong. She can use guns, for example. She can be protective of not just her own son, but also mother of the nation.
The country, right. And in fact, that's her biography. The title is, Mother of Korea, which I have a copy of in English. Now, it'll be interesting to see if she goes to Vietnam at the end of this month. I expect she probably will. Do you imagine she will?
She may, yeah. She'll probably accompany Kim Jong Un. But what's also interesting that we talk about Kim Jong Un emulating, copying his grandfather, but also see the similarity between Kim Jong Suk and in Lee Seol-ju as well. But in a 21st century kind of ideal mother and wife.
Sort of an updated version. Although we haven't yet. I think we haven't seen her holding their daughter.
That's true, yeah.
And that would be, like, if she did that would be obviously an image of Lee Seol-ju as mother. We've seen a lot of images of her as glamorous wife, but we haven't seen her
as a mother
at an orphanage or with their children. What about Hyun Seong, the leader of the Moranbong band? She was here a couple of times last year, first to visit South Korea and inspect the facilities for the artistic troupe. And then she led the artistic troupe and, of course, famously gave, she sang the last song together with a South Korean singer. What do you think about Hyun Seong-wol?
She's as powerful as Yo Jong. I
Really?
think Yo Jong and Hyun Seong-wol, I think the sort of chemistry that's appeared in the public, North Korean TV and the public, images of the two is very close together. And one's working on the propaganda. The other is working on that sort of cultural aspect, the beauty of North Korea and the songs and dance, the music and all together. It's a very important part of the whole propaganda, creating an image of North Korea as more friendly, more sort of jolly, one to the international community.
And she definitely seemed to gain a lot of fans in South Korea when she was here, didn't she? I mean, a lot of South Koreans said positive things about her.
Yeah. I mean, she's very charismatic.
Charisma. That's the word they used. Yeah, that's right. Not only attractive, but also showing some sort of power, some sort of magnetism.
And she also survived that rumor that there's a sex scandal and many members of the Moranbong was involved in, and that's also related to Lee Seol-ju as well. Lee Seol-ju was in this sort of sex video. I didn't see the videos, but I saw some of the images extracted from the video. But I don't think that was Lee Seol-ju.
Okay,
someone made it up.
The rumor that happened later on was that Hyun Seong-wol was executed as a result of this video. And of course,
she
she hasn't been executed.
She survived. That's very common in these rumors about disappeared North Korean government official. They always survived or revived from the tombs.
Sometimes, although Jung Suk clearly did not.
He did not.
Right.
And
that rumor was true. And sometimes
I think that was a moment that the reason that I don't really trust North Korean regime is after that moment, the execution of Jang Song-taek was very un-Korean.
Wow. What about Kim Jong-nam at the airport in Kuala Lumpur?
The death of Jang Song-taek was the moment I lost trust in the North Korean regime. Because he was the last hope that can change North Korea into more sort of reformed countries following steps of China or even Vietnam, because they are the reformers. And Jang Song-taek and Kim Jong-nam are very close together. And Jang Song-taek was known to support Kim Jong-nam as a successor of Kim Jong-il, and he obviously was not selected and was killed by his stepbrother.
Well, that's right. They didn't even admit that it was Kim Jong-nam. They said he was. They had another name for him, didn't they?
Yeah.
Anyway, we've still got two more North Korean women to talk about. Choi Son-hee, very well known to American officials as a tough and energetic negotiator. She was made Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of the North American portfolio last year. And she was a participant in the Trump-Kim summit in Singapore in June last year. And she met with U.S. Special Representative Stephen Biegun in Stockholm in January to prepare for the second summit. But right after that, she was replaced by Kim Yo Jong, who accompanied Kim Yo Jong to the White House in the same month. So this apparent switch was revealed by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. How do you read this change? Is she being demoted or is she being moved aside for some reason? What's going on there?
I don't think she's demoted. They're doing the role play, bad cop and good cop.
Which one is she?
Choi Sun-yi is doing a very tough role, and she's the bad cop.
So she's bad cop.
She will say something on behalf of Kim Kye-gwan, for example, and she will say, some very tough words in front of the Americans. Whereas Kim Yo Jong is more, he's very young. Tae-yong said Kim Yo Jong is the youngest member of the strategy bureau within the foreign ministry, and he is a good negotiator. He's more flexible. He can bring in sort of a more forward-looking thinking to this bilateral relation, whereas Choi Sun-yi will probably stick to the old book.
Now, the last name you gave, Kim Song-hae, is perhaps the least known of all the women that we've discussed, but certainly deserves more attention because she's been part of inter-Korean meetings since the first Kim summit in 2000, and she also participated in the North Korea-US meeting with Mike Pompeo and President Trump, and was part of the Singapore summit delegation in June last year. This is despite her official role as being, the vice chairperson of the Committee for the Peaceful Unification of the Fatherland, which normally is in charge of inter-Korean relations. She's also been present at the summit with the United States. So what do you think about her? Is she someone to watch?
She's playing a supporting role for Yo Jong, Kim Yo Jong. But as you said, and she's appearing in sort of different, dialogue, different, meetings, not just the inter-Korean relation, but as you say, the meeting with the US, she's always there. She's not really, in the strategic thinking or policy side, but she's also more like a coordinator, more sort of, messenger between different political parties and different people, different figures within the party.
Now, in the coming year, which do you expect the roles of these women to grow?
In the North, definitely. I think they need some, positive, less threatening image of North Korea. Men dominating, more sort of militaristic image is not going to help, relieve the sanctions or improving inter-Korean relation. But ironically, more democratic South is lacking female representation in politics and economy. And when it comes to the peace process and inter-Korean dialogue, there's a noticeable absence of female representation.
So the role of women in inter-Korean relations in general, you would hope that would grow, certainly on the South Korean side.
Hope so. I'm just a wishful thinking that there will be more women's voice into this peace process. The exchange between North and South Korean women and more sort of inclusive politics in this very critical inter-Korean dialogue and peace process. I hope to see, but I can't really predict there will be more women representation in this political process, but that's my hope.
What about on sort of the track 2 level, North Korean and South Korean NGOs meeting together? Is there a lot of women representation in that?
Yeah, I also gathered this from this peace forum. A South Korean women's organization has been trying to have some conversation with the North Korean counterpart. But the thing is that North Korean women's organization, although they presented themselves as a non-governmental organization, they all belong to government, of course.
Sure.
So there's a state organization, and they don't see South Korean counterpart as powerful or as authoritative as them. So they don't. North Korean women's organization don't see South Korean counterpart as equal. They want someone to be represented from South Korean government.
So the Ministry of Gender Equality, for example. Or Ministry of Gender Equality sponsored or controlled some sort of a quasi-governmental women's organization, not a totally independent civil society. Do you happen to know the name of the North Korean Association for Women?
조선 여맹.
여맹.
Yeah, 여맹. Okay. It's a women's organization.
Now, unfortunately, the topic of North Korean celebrity defectors, which I really wanted to talk about, we're going to have to leave for your next interview because we've run out of time today. Do you have any final thoughts for us, just in the lead up to the second Trump-Kim summit or for the rest of 2019, something to watch?
Something to watch. So the second summit is happening in about 2 weeks' time. Let's not hope too much. I think too much expectation will bring too much disappointment. It's a step by step. There will be some improvement between the two countries. And regardless of what's happening between North Korea and the US, I think we need to focus on what's happening between the two Koreas. I think international community has not paid proper attention to what South Korea has been doing. South Korea has been marginalized, so watch out this space.
Okay, well, thank you once again, Dr. Song, for coming on the NK News podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Don't forget, listeners, you can listen to all of our shows as well as read full bios and show notes on our website, www.nknews.org. NK News is the leading repository of North Korean research, news and analysis, and we hope to see you there. And please send feedback, comments, questions, or guest suggestions to podcast@nknews.org. Our podcast was produced, as always, by Arias Dare and facilitated by Chad O'Carroll and Christina Lee. Lastly, a reminder that one random reviewer per week will win a free NK News membership. So please review us after listening and you might win. And you can save $50 off your NK News subscription by using the code podcast at the checkout. Thanks again and listen next time.